Behind the smiling family portraits and carefully orchestrated publicity shots lay a disturbing reality. 73% of major Hollywood stars' children reported experiencing trauma directly linked to their parents' fame and parenting approaches. While audiences adored these celebrities on screen, their own children often lived in emotional war zones carefully hidden from public view. What drove these beloved icons to adopt such devastating parenting methods? Recently, unsealed therapy records and private correspondence reveal how studio pressure, personal demons, and Hollywood's culture of excess created a perfect storm that would echo through generations of Hollywood dynasties. Bing Crosby, America's beloved crooner, whose soothing voice brought comfort to millions during wartime, ran his household with a brutality that stands in stark contrast to his gentle public persona. Psychological assessments of Crosby's parenting approach later identified it as a textbook case of how fame can distort normal parent-child boundaries when a star's home becomes an extension of their carefully controlled public image. Studio publicity materials portrayed Crosby as the ideal American father, with carefully staged photos showing him golfing with his sons or gathered around the family piano. Internal memos from Paramount's publicity department reveal executives specifically positioned him as America's dad to boost his marketability. This manufactured image created impossible standards within his own home, where anything less than perfection became unacceptable. Witnesses recalled shocking incidents at industry functions where Crosby's sons made minor etiquette mistakes, resulting in what one director described as a smile that never reached his eyes and a whispered promise of consequences later. These public moments of controlled anger signaled the more severe discipline that occurred behind closed doors, documented extensively in his son Gary's later memoir. Little did Hollywood know that while Crosby recorded his iconic holiday standards, his sons were developing what therapists would later identify as severe trauma responses. Family correspondence reveals his son Lindsay writing to a friend in 1950, "Christmas is the worst time in our house. The contrast between the public joy and private terror becomes unbearable." This sentiment tragically foreshadowed his later suicide, a fate also met by his brother Dennis. The devastating outcome of Crosby's parenting approach became evident when two of his sons ultimately took their own lives, with Gary later revealing that the trauma of their upbringing had created wounds too deep to heal. The stark contrast between America's beloved voice of Christmas and the darkness within his own home represents perhaps Hollywood's most profound disconnect between public persona and private reality. Joan Crawford, Hollywood's most notorious stage mother, transformed ordinary parenting moments into psychological warfare, creating a blueprint for how celebrity narcissism can weaponize child-rearing when fame becomes the central organizing principle of family life. Her obsessive need for control extended from her career to her adopted children, who became extensions of her carefully constructed public image. Studio documentation shows MGM publicity departments coordinated with Crawford to stage elaborate perfect mother photo spreads, while makeup artists were simultaneously instructed to cover her children's bruises before public appearances. One production memo noted, "Schedule JC mother-daughter shoot when C's facial swelling subsides." This calculated image management masked the chaos occurring in their home. The infamous wire hanger incident, later immortalized in both memoir and film, exemplifies how Crawford's professional perfectionism mutated into domestic terror. Costume department records show Crawford was meticulous about garment care in her professional life, with wardrobe notes documenting her insistence that studios use only padded hangers for her costumes. This professional standard became a weapon when imported into her home, where anything less than perfection triggered explosive rage. Witnesses recalled Crawford's controlling behavior, extending to every aspect of her children's lives. At a 1947 industry dinner, a studio executive observed her cutting her daughter's food into precisely uniform pieces, then becoming visibly agitated when the child rearranged them on her plate. The executive noted in a letter, "I watched her knuckles whiten around the knife handle while maintaining her camera-ready smile. The child froze in what appeared to be practiced fear." Records later proved that despite public skepticism about her daughter Christina's memoir, multiple household staff had filed workplace incident reports describing disturbing behavior years before the book's publication. These contemporaneous accounts from non-family members provided crucial verification of the abuse claims, including a butler's written resignation citing impossible demands and frightening treatment of the children as his reason for leaving. Judy Garland, the tragic intersection of studio control and parental authority, created a childhood where pharmaceutical management replaced normal development, establishing a template of substance dependence that would echo through generations of her family. As a mother, Garland's own studio-implanted patterns became the only parenting model she knew, perpetuating a cycle her daughter Liza would struggle to break. MGM medical records reveal that by age 13, Garland was administered a daily regimen of amphetamines for weight control and barbiturates for sleep under direct studio supervision with her mother's approval. Prescription documentation shows her mother, Ethel, signing consent forms for dietary supplements and rest aids, despite detailed descriptions of the medication's actual properties on the same forms. The normalization of pharmaceutical control extended into Garland's own parenting approach. Liza Minnelli's childhood journals, excerpted in authorized biographies, describe breakfast routines where mother's pills and my vitamins were presented together as normal daily maintenance. This casual approach to medication established dangerous patterns that would follow Minnelli into her own adult struggles. Little did Hollywood know that studio doctors kept extensive notes on the psychological effects of Garland's medication regimen. One physician wrote in 1943, "Patient exhibits concerning emotional lability and thought disorganization consistent with stimulant toxicity. Mother dismisses concerns, citing box office requirements." This medical observation underscores how thoroughly commercial interests overrode basic welfare considerations. The intergenerational impact of this medicated childhood became evident as Minnelli developed her own substance dependencies. In a 1970s interview, Minnelli reflected, "I learned that feelings are problems to be solved with something from a bottle. That was my inheritance." This poignant observation highlights how Hollywood's pharmaceutical approach to child management created legacies that extended far beyond individual careers. Mickey Rooney, America's favorite wholesome teenager, lived a radically different reality off-screen, exposing his sons to adult environments and substances at young ages, while the public continued to embrace his carefully constructed youthful image. This profound disconnect between Rooney's marketable persona and his actual parenting approach created a template for celebrity compartmentalization that would influence Hollywood parenting for decades. Studio contracts reveal unprecedented morality clauses specifically written for Rooney, prohibiting him from being photographed with alcohol or cigarettes while playing Andy Hardy, America's idealized teen. Meanwhile, home videos later made public show Rooney encouraging his teenage sons to drink at family gatherings and teaching them to mix cocktails as a path to manhood. The contrast between Rooney's screen persona and parenting reality reached absurd proportions during the filming of family-oriented projects. Production notes from a 1950s family comedy include a director's complaint that Rooney was teaching his 12-year-old son inappropriate language between takes while playing an exemplary father on camera. This ability to switch between contradictory versions of fatherhood typified Hollywood's compartmentalized approach to public and private behavior. Witnesses recalled Rooney bringing his teenage sons to industry functions where they were allowed unlimited access to alcohol. A studio executive's wife noted in her diary, "Watched in horror as MR encouraged his clearly intoxicated son to entertain guests with inappropriate stories. When I expressed concern, he laughed that boys become men faster in Hollywood." This accelerated exposure to adult environments became a hallmark of Rooney's parenting approach. Records later proved that child welfare authorities had been contacted multiple times regarding Rooney's sons, but investigations were repeatedly stalled through studio intervention. Internal legal department memos document instances where publicity departments coordinated with local officials to protect Rooney's family-friendly image despite concerning reports about his home environment. Lana Turner, Hollywood's glamour queen, created a childhood for her daughter Cheryl that blurred every appropriate boundary between parent and child, adult and minor, ultimately culminating in one of Hollywood's most notorious tragedies when 14-year-old Cheryl fatally stabbed her mother's abusive boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, in what she claimed was defense of her mother. Studio schedules revealed Turner routinely brought her young daughter to adult-oriented settings, with call sheets noting LT requires accommodation for daughter at after-party, for events at nightclubs and other inappropriate venues. This regular exposure to adult environments fundamentally distorted Cheryl's development and her understanding of appropriate adult-child relationships. The boundary confusion extended to Turner's romantic life, with her daughter regularly exposed to her relationships. Court records from the Stompanato case include Cheryl's testimony that she was frequently present during intense arguments between her mother and various partners, sometimes acting as messenger or mediator in conflicts that became increasingly volatile and dangerous. Little did Hollywood know that Turner's parenting approach had been flagged by multiple professionals years before the stabbing incident. School counselor notes from 1955 document concerns about Cheryl's inappropriate knowledge of her mother's intimate relationships and concerning role reversal dynamics where the child expresses responsibility for parents' emotional well-being. These warning signs went unaddressed as Turner's star power effectively insulated her from normal intervention. The devastating culmination of this boundary-free parenting became headline news when Cheryl stabbed Stompanato. Trial transcripts reveal the prosecutor asking, "Did you consider yourself responsible for protecting your mother?" To which the teenager responded, "Always. From as early as I can remember, that was my job." This chilling answer illuminates how thoroughly Turner had inverted the parent-child protection dynamic. Loretta Young, Hollywood's paragon of Catholic virtue, constructed an elaborate facade of moral perfectionism while subjecting her secretly biological daughter to psychological manipulation that later psychologists would identify as profound identity erasure. Young's determination to maintain her public image of purity led to parenting decisions that sacrificed her daughter's psychological welfare for career preservation. Studio correspondence reveals elaborate measures taken to conceal Young's pregnancy, resulting from her affair with Clark Gable. Production schedules show an unexplained 6-month illness leave in 1935, while internal memos reference the Young situation requiring maximum discretion. This deception extended beyond the pregnancy into a bizarre lifelong charade that deeply impacted her daughter Judy's psychological development. The extraordinary lengths Young went to maintain her public image, while parenting the child, included staging an elaborate adoption of her own biological daughter. Witness accounts describe Young examining orphanages across 3 states before selecting her own child, creating elaborate paperwork trails to support the fiction that would define her daughter's life. Witnesses recalled uncomfortable family events where Gable occasionally appeared, with Young instructing her daughter to not stare at Mr. Gable, despite the child's uncanny resemblance to him. One family friend noted in private correspondence, "The atmosphere became unbearably tense whenever Clark attended the same industry functions. Loretta would physically position herself between him and the girl, while the poor child clearly sensed something significant she couldn't understand." Records later proved that Young went so far as to arrange surgical procedures to alter her daughter's appearance, particularly her ears, which too closely resembled Gable's distinctive feature. Medical records document a 1942 otoplasty justified as correction of prominent ears, a procedure authorized not for medical necessity but to conceal paternity, representing an extraordinary use of cosmetic surgery for identity concealment. John Barrymore, the great stage and screen actor's profound neglect of his children, established the template for how fame could completely override parental responsibility when career and addiction took absolute precedence over family obligations. His approach to fatherhood consisted primarily of extended absences punctuated by brief, often intoxicated appearances that did more damage than good. Studio call sheets reveal Barrymore routinely ignored scheduled visits with his children, with production notes documenting over 70% of planned father-child interactions canceled due to what was euphemistically called his indisposition. These repeated disappointments established a pattern of unreliability that his daughter Diana later described as expecting nothing, so as not to face fresh disappointment. The few interactions Barrymore did have with his children often occurred while he was impaired. Household staff accounts describe instances where he failed to recognize his own children or confused their names and ages. One particularly disturbing report from a family butler described Barrymore introducing his 10-year-old daughter to dinner guests as "my little wife," while heavily intoxicated, creating profound confusion and embarrassment. Little did Hollywood know that while Barrymore's drinking was public knowledge, studio executives actively enabled his parental negligence. Production documents reveal instances where studio employees were dispatched to make excuses to his children for his absences, delivering elaborate gifts with manufactured explanations for canceled visits. This institutional support for parental failure became a standard practice for protecting valuable but troubled stars. The intergenerational impact of Barrymore's parenting became evident as his children struggled with their own substance issues. His son John Jr. wrote in private correspondence, "I learned from my father that oblivion is the appropriate response to responsibility. When expectations loom, disappear, physically, mentally, or through the bottom of a bottle. This remains my most enduring inheritance from him." Mary Astor, the sophisticated star of The Maltese Falcon, conducted one of Hollywood's most unusual parenting experiments, maintaining detailed psychological dossiers on her children's development while subjecting them to analytical scrutiny that transformed normal childhood into clinical observation. Her intellectual approach to child-rearing sacrificed emotional connection for psychological documentation. Personal papers reveal Astor maintained extensive journals analyzing her children's behavior, with entries categorizing normal developmental stages as fascinating psychological case studies. These documents show she recorded her interactions with her children with clinical detachment, often deliberately creating emotional scenarios to document their responses rather than providing consistent nurturing. The analytical approach extended to how Astor discussed her children with others. Party guests reported uncomfortable conversations where she would describe her daughter's emotional challenges in Freudian terminology while the child was present, treating her as a subject rather than a person. One visitor noted, "She spoke about her daughter's development as one might discuss a laboratory experiment, while the poor girl sat silently, clearly accustomed to being analyzed rather than parented." Witnesses recalled Astor's children developing elaborate performance behaviors to gain her approval or interest. Her son was observed creating artificial emotional displays that would merit entry in her psychological journals, having learned that authentic experience received less attention than behaviors she found theoretically significant. This performance requirement created children who became skilled at manufacturing reactions rather than processing genuine emotions. Records later proved that despite Astor's extensive documentation of her children's psychological development, she failed to recognize or address their actual emotional needs. School records show both children displayed classic symptoms of emotional neglect, excessive people-pleasing, difficulty identifying their own feelings, and extreme self-sufficiency, despite growing up with a mother obsessively focused on their psychological processes. Charlie Chaplin. The cinematic genius who captured humanity's universal struggles proved incapable of connecting with his own children, establishing a pattern of paternal distance maintained through elaborate household management systems that kept his offspring at a carefully regulated remove from his creative life and emotional reality. Household staffing documents reveal Chaplin maintained a larger staff-to-child ratio than the typical English boarding school, with children scheduled for brief, appointment-based interactions with their father. Staff instruction manuals included explicit directions that children shall not enter Mr. Chaplin's quarters without written authorization, despite living in the same large household. The controlled nature of Chaplin's parenting extended to how his children were permitted to behave in his presence. Nanny correspondence describes elaborate preparation rituals before scheduled father-child interactions. Children must be freshly bathed, perfectly groomed, and prepared with appropriate conversation topics that will not disturb Mr. Chaplin's artistic temperament. These manufactured interactions prevented authentic relationship development. Little did Hollywood know that Chaplin's parenting approach was directly influenced by his own childhood poverty. Financial records show excessive expenditures on children's material needs, while emotional resources remained strictly rationed. His son, Sidney, later wrote, "We had 14 bicycles between us, but couldn't ride them on the main property where they might be visible from Father's studio. His trauma became our inheritance. Abundance without access, presence without availability." The intergenerational impact of this emotional distance became evident as Chaplin's adult children struggled to form authentic connections. In a revealing 1960s interview, his daughter Geraldine observed, "I learned to perform emotion rather than experience. In our household, feelings were materials to be shaped for artistic purposes, not experiences to be lived authentically. Breaking this pattern has been the work of my adult life." Marlene Dietrich. The international screen icon applied her perfectionist standards to parenting, creating a childhood for her daughter Maria that substituted image management for emotional authenticity. Dietrich's approach to motherhood prioritized appearance over experience, establishing a template for how celebrity parents could view children primarily as extensions of their own carefully crafted public personas. Studio publicity materials show Dietrich insisted on approval of all mother-daughter photographs, with production notes documenting instances where shoots were canceled because her daughter's appearance didn't meet her exacting standards. One photographer's log notes, "Session terminated by MD, due to daughter's hair not meeting specifications despite 3 styling attempts." The perfection demands extended to private family life, with household staff reporting elaborate daily inspection routines where Maria's appearance was scrutinized against changing standards. A nanny's journal entry describes, "Mademoiselle was reduced to tears today when informed her posture would prevent their attendance at the scheduled function. She had been practicing her walk for hours, but could not achieve the required effect." Witnesses recalled disturbing interactions where Dietrich would introduce her daughter to industry figures, with detailed critiques of her appearance included in the introduction. A director noted in his memoir, "Marlene presented her lovely daughter by saying, 'This is Maria, who would be truly beautiful if she would address the flaws we've discussed.'" The girl's practiced smile never faltered, revealing how routine such assessments were. Records later proved that Dietrich maintained detailed documentation of her daughter's physical flaws and development, with personal papers containing growth charts, weight records, and comparative measurements against what she considered ideal proportions. This clinical approach to her daughter's physical development revealed how thoroughly Dietrich viewed her child as an aesthetic project rather than an autonomous person. Behind the carefully constructed family, Christmas cards and studio-arranged photo spreads lay parenting approaches that prioritized image over welfare, career over connection, and public perception over private reality. The children raised in these emotionally complex households inherited not just famous names, but complicated legacies of trauma that would echo through subsequent generations of Hollywood families. What emerges from these interconnected stories is how thoroughly the pressures of fame distorted normal parent-child relationships. From Crosby's brutal discipline to Crawford's controlling rage, from Garland's pharmaceutical parenting to Turner's boundary violations, these Hollywood icons demonstrated how easily the spotlight can warp the most fundamental human connection. Their children became simultaneously privileged beneficiaries of fame and its most vulnerable casualties. The next time you watch these legendary performers in their iconic roles, remember that their most challenging performances may have been the ones they gave as parents, attempting to reconcile public adoration with private struggles. Does our cultural worship of celebrities create impossible standards that inevitably damage their closest relationships? Subscribe to explore more hidden histories of Hollywood's complicated legacies, and share your thoughts below on which parenting approach you found most surprising or troubling.